Welcome to Roll for Insight, the D&D podcast where we dive into the game, the lore, and the internet's favorite arguments. Grab your dice and your character sheet, and let's roll for insight. Hello, welcome to Roll for Insight. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the origin feat Healer out of the 2024 D&D Player's Handbook. So, Healer is an origin feat that is available at character creation by choosing the Hermit origin, or by choosing it as a feat when you level up. Also, if you're using a background or origin from an older D&D version that doesn't provide a feat, you can take this as an origin feat of your choice. This one does have some in-combat value and works really well with both casters and non-casters. So in this episode, we'll be covering the description of the origin feat from the Player's Handbook, we'll review some gameplay uses plus some benefits and limitations of the feat, we'll pull some ideas and opinions from the internet, and last we'll end with some fun fact information about the feat. Okay, first topic, Healer. It is available to the Hermit origin, and you gain the following benefits. Battle Medic. If you have a healer's kit, you can expend one use of it and tend to a creature within 5 feet of yourself as a utilize action. That creature can expend one of its hit point dice, and you then roll that die. The creature regains a number of hit points equal to the roll plus your proficiency bonus. And healing rerolls. Whenever you roll a die to determine the number of hit points you restore with a spell, or with this feat's Battle Medic benefit, you can re-roll the die if it rolls a 1, and you must use the new roll. So a few clarifications on the description. At first glance, Healer looks very straightforward, but there are a few very important clarifications that really define how good this feat can be at the table. So with the Battle Medic ability, you do have a few requirements. You do need a healer's kit, which regularly costs 5 gold pieces, and it has 10 uses. As a utilize action, you can expend one of the uses to stabilize an unconscious creature that has 0 hit points without needing to make a wisdom or medicine check. So you have to use one charge of that kit, a utilize action, and it has to be on a creature within 5 feet. So the creature being healed gets to expend one of its own hit point dice, you roll that die, and then they regain the roll plus your proficiency bonus. So this is not free healing in the sense of creating hit points out of nothing. What you're doing is you're converting hit dice into in-combat healing. So this ability shifts a resource that's normally reserved for short rests into a combat or emergency use situation, which makes it very valuable. Now it also scales with proficiency bonus, so it naturally scales as you level up. So at low levels, tier 1, level 1 to 4, you get a +2 bonus. In the mid-game, you get a +3 to 4 bonus, and in the high levels, you get a +5 to +6 bonus. And that means that the healing stays relevant and the feat doesn't fall off as quickly as the older version of Healer. And by taking this feat, even martial characters that have no spellcasting, they can still contribute to the party's survival in a meaningful way. Now as for healing rerolls, no longer are we healing for 1 hit point unless you are very unlucky and roll 1 again. So this applies whenever you roll the healing dice, so whether it's from the Battle Medic ability or from spells that you cast. Now a few key points here. You can re-roll any die that rolls a 1, but you must take the new roll. And this applies to every healing roll, not once per turn or per short rest or anything like that. This makes it a very consistent boost to healing, especially on the smaller dice like the D4s and the D6s, where you're naturally rolling 1s about 15 to 25% of the time anyways. Now moving into some gameplay uses, Healer sits in a really interesting space where it's not a main healer replacement, but it can dramatically improve the party's resilience. So combat is really where Healer shines the most. You can stabilize and heal a downed ally without magic. You can get someone back into the fight without spending spell slots. And you can heal during combat using a utilize action, not a spell action. And that could be really beneficial in a couple of situations. Like when the party is low on spell slots, or the cleric or druid is busy concentrating on something else, or not in range, and you need emergency healing right now. And if your DM likes to counterspell your heals, then the Healer origin feat can be very powerful. Now, Healer also pairs really well with frontliners who can safely move through the battlefield to get in range of that 5-foot requirement. And it can also really help out with parties that are expecting multiple encounters between rests when they can't do a short rest after a fight. Now, it also has some exploration and utility uses outside of combat. The healer's kit uses becomes a lot more valuable because you can patch people up after traps, or if there's like environmental hazards, you can still help out on the healing side of things. And it's really about stretching your hit dice farther over the adventuring day. So instead of forcing a short rest, which you might not be able or allowed to do, you can trade the healer's kit uses with the hit dice for health right now. So in survival focused or dungeon heavy campaigns, this feat can quietly save a lot of spell slots every single day. And at low levels, that is incredibly important. So this feat has a lot of synergy with spellcasters because there's a lot better value from spells like Cure Wounds or Healing Words when you're re-rolling the ones. So there's fewer wasted low healing rolls and you can bump up that average. And then non-casters really benefit from the reliable healing and feeling like a support role without actually changing their build or multi-classing or using a lot of gold on things like healing potions. So this does really make the healer origin feat a strong party role feat and not just for one person or just the healer of the group. So there's a lot of benefits to the healer feat. It does reduce pressure on spell slots like we mentioned before. It is converting the hit dice into in-combat healing. And then it also scales naturally with level as you get more hit dice to use. So it works really well in things like the low magic campaigns, the gritty adventuring campaigns, or parties that don't have a dedicated healer to use those spell slots. There are some limitations though as well, because Battle Medic, it's not a free ability. It still consumes hit dice. You still need proper positioning within that 5-foot requirement, which can be an issue. You don't have the range, and it still costs an action to use the ability. So you're going to see some loss in value if your party really doesn't run out of spell slots a lot, or if you're able to take a lot of long rests, and if healing is already abundant in the form of like potions, scrolls, casters in the party. So it's not meant to replace the magical healing, it's there to supplement and support the party. Now, getting into some of the discussion board topics on the internet, there are some very familiar debates that we've heard about healing before. So first off, isn't 5th edition healing just bad? A lot of discussion happens around this topic. So a lot of people argue that preventing damage is always going to be better than healing, and in many ways, yes, that is true. Healing mid-combat is not efficient. The general healing spells that you get access to are not going to out-heal the damage that is being done to your character. But people who are liking the healer feat do argue that the feat improves the action economy flexibility, gives you options. And a lot of the times it's about keeping people upright, not topping off their hit points. So this feat is really about managing the ultimate failure states because efficiency in healing doesn't matter if the entire party is dead. Another common take is that this feat is just for parties without a cleric. But keep in mind, that can be a valid reason to want to take this feat because not everybody wants to be locked into a role of designated healer or something similar. So this is an option that gives parties a lot more flexibility in handling the matters of healing. And this fits a lot with the 2024 design trends where they are intentionally creating fewer mandatory party compositions because in earlier editions of D&D, a lot of the time you'd be locked into the traditional fighter, cleric, rogue, wizard classes, and you do your part and you stay in your lane. So this helps the shared responsibility of survival. So it's not just up to the cleric or the druid in the party to keep people topped up here with health. It can fall on everybody now. Now, another pretty common argument is that the old healer feat was either better or worse than it is now. And I suppose it's just different because the older feat focused more on the large, limited use healing bursts, and the new version focuses more on the consistency and scaling with the levels. And it's a lot about resource conversion, giving players more options or tools in the toolkit to get the job done. So whether it's better or worse depends heavily on the campaign pacing and what your resting situation is like. Now, the last segment for this episode is the fun fact information about the healer origin feat. So, in the earlier 5e version of Healer, using Healer's Kit allowed the creature to regain 1 hit point, so a pretty large boost in the new version, with a once per short or long rest healing boost using the kit. And in 3.5, there was no healer feat, and healing in general relied very heavily on spell casting because even resting for 8 hours only restored 1 hit point per character level. Second edition D&D was very similar to 3.5 in that there were no hit dice or short or long rests, or ways to recover the large amounts of health instantly that we have now with 5th edition. So where this leaves us on the healer origin feat, it's not flashy, it's not going to out-damage anything, and it definitely won't replace a full caster or the big healing spells. But at the right table, it really helps smooth out the resource management side of things. It helps keep allies on their feet, especially when the spell slots are running low, and it gives you just a little more breathing room when the resources are tight or you're running the survival campaigns. Well, that's it for this session of Roll for Insight. Thanks for listening, and thank you to all our supporters on patreon.com/rollforinsightpodcast. And we will see you next time.